podcast. I'm Steve Zaki with some sad news to report. USAC Stock Car driver Bay Darnell passed away on Tuesday at the age of 91. And Bay was an old family friend, buddies of my dad when they used to run around at the Milwaukee Mile and elsewhere. And I can remember as a kid, Bay and guys like Norm Nelson and those guys coming over to the house for race parties, and my dad would bring out the projector at the old race car movies and whatnot. So I knew Bay a long time, got to know family a bit with Danny, and then Erik that came up after and had a career in NASCAR, and now his son Jackson is running around in Charlotte, which is good to see. But sad news, but Bay had a heck of a run. Good driver, respected driver, certainly, and did a lot for USAC stock car racing. He was one of these guys that a lot of people respected from the racing side, the business side of things, and was just somebody that was a voice of reason in that division, which was a division at that time certainly needed a lot of that. Started out modifieds racing at Waukegan and race in Northern Illinois, and also raced on the quarter mile in Milwaukee. Had a hell of a wreck there when his tire wheel spindle or whatever came off, and he went flipping in at that daytime show they had. The only daytime modified stock car race they had at Milwaukee Mile in the quarter mile. And he flipped quite spectacularly. I raced at well, Chicago had so many racetracks back in those days. In fact, I believe uh, he raced, and according to Stan Kalwasinski, our ace guy down there, his racing historian, 1954, when NASCAR's Grand National Series visited the Chicago area for the first time, Darnell raced a 1950 Ford, finishing 23rd after starting 17th in a 23 car field for a 200 lap race. And Bay told Stan Kalwasinski, he goes, "It seemed like Lee Petty lapped me every 4 laps or so. I remember I had a lot of trouble. It was a long race, and but that's where I got my start. I had an old Ford with a flathead engine." And he raced out at Deerfield, Illinois, and later I think it was Lake Bluff. Just neat guy from a fan's point of view. He was one of the best. After the races, he would be always there for autographs and chatting and debriefing. Debriefing back then wasn't with your race engineer. It was with you talked with your crew guys with some beer and fans stopping by for autographs. That's how you debrief back then. But got his start at USAC, I think it was about 1962, 63, running Fords, and then moved into the Mopars. And every year it seemed like he got a little better, a little better, a little better. Consistency was there and whatnot. Ran 3 IndyCar races, ran 2 dirt car races, and finished, I think, both of those. And then unfortunately had the crash in '68 with Dooman and Norm Brown. But it was really in the early '70s when he switched over to that Charger. Things really started to come together for him. A very consistent driver, finishing third in the points in '73, '78, and '80. Got his first win in 1974. That was a big deal because I remember the next race, I believe, was at Milwaukee or a week or two later, and I remember that they brought a big cake celebrating, and the celebration was kept on going for a couple of weeks on that one. And of course, the iconic car, that bright orange number 12, good looking stock car. And then Bay also drove or wore a orange driver's suit, and so his nickname appropriately was the Great Pumpkin. And I remember my dad always shook his head because Bay didn't initially, I believe that the dash was orange, and he's like, my dad was going to Bay, doesn't that bother you? Why don't you paint that black? I remember them having that conversation early on. He eventually, I think he might have painted it black. I'm not sure, but he had a couple wins. I remember he had a big win at Texas, the old Texas World Speedway, in the Texas 500. And anytime you could beat AJ in his backyard, that was a big deal. And I remember Bay, I believe he some got a case, couple cases, whatever those race programs, and he was more than happy to give you a copy of that program with him on the cover. He raced in ARCA too. Started a bit in ARCA. In fact, famously was one of the only guys to get into Lake Lloyd at Daytona. There's a famous photo of that. He slid down the backstretch and kind of went over and stuck it into the lake. And he also at the end of USAC there was some combination with them in ARCA. I remember they did a combo race in '82. So he ran some ARCA races, and then they had the IRA races. IRA what Sal Tavalla started. I don't even want to get into that at this point. It's not important, but Bay Darnell was certainly a fan favorite, and he was you would came to the races, especially when grandson Erik was running with Jack Roush. He used to tour with the RV, and you could really see uh, how proud he was of Erik. And I thought that was a really, really neat deal that he got to see that and could really see the joy. And Erik certainly, a couple years maybe earlier that he probably would have had a longer career, but that's when the start of they wanted guys with checks. Certainly sad losing Bay Darnell, but let's celebrate his life and what he meant to the USAC Stock Car Series. Because if there's he didn't win a championship or anything, but if there was a guy that was out there promoting the series, not only after the races and being such a fan favorite, but also doing car shows and doing off-season promotion and whatnot, and just getting out there and being part of the series. Bay was one of them. Bay was a very, very important person for that, for the USAC Stock Car Series and racing in general. So having Bay Darnell around back then for that series was very, very important. And his smile and just his enthusiasm was second to none. Got to see Bobby Unser a couple years ago in Albuquerque and doing research on a book that'll be coming out on USAC stock car racing, hopefully in the next year. And I asked him about Bay Darnell because Bobby ran a lot with Bay. He says, I loved it. So he would call me up or I would call him up and say, you got a car? And it was always a handshake deal. And Bay had good equipment for Uncle Bobby, and he won a few times. In fact, his last USAC win, I believe, was at the Governor's Cup in 1978 in that white number 4. That was a Darnell car. So he always ran well, and a lot of guys ran second cars for Bay Darnell. Gary Bettenhausen was one. Dick Trickle famously in a Miller 274, and darn it, boy, he could have won that race. That would have been a very hell of a popular win if he could have won that race. Driving a Bay Darnell car, Dick Trickle winning USAC stock car race in Milwaukee, that would have been huge. That's one that bothers me to this day. I wish he could have won that race. But very, like I said, good equipment, and Uncle Bobby spoke very highly of Bay Darnell and just how easy it was to work with, and it was a joy. He did it because he liked doing it, and yeah, I could make a couple bucks too, he would say. So Bay Darnell, we're gonna miss you, buddy, and condolences to the family, and you know, Erik, keep Jackson moving along here. We'd love to see another Darnell in racing. So condolences to the family, and when you think of Bay, hoist up a Miller or a Schlitz, whatever you got, and say thank you, Bay, and thanks for the memories. And we certainly appreciate it. You will be missed.